So that's a cute thing. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just putting the 9 principles themselves. So of these 9 principles, again, I'm not going to cover all of them. So I'm going, just for the sake of time, I'm just going to touch upon the first, the third, and the fourth. So this is in the first module, identifying my prosperity type and career field. And principle 1 is connecting our nature with our livelihood. And this is the principle that I'll spend the most time on in this talk. And it's the one that, so Urmila has been touring the world giving talks about this book, and many people have found this very, very valuable. So I hope you will too. So we all know cash-rich people who are unhappy. And maybe we can think of times in our own life when one was cash-rich and unhappy. So you could have all the cash in the world, but you could feel empty inside. So there's more to life than cash. I'm sure all of you already are aware of this, but it's an important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about our career. And on the other hand, we probably have people we know who are happy, but they're cash poor. And we've all had, well, maybe all of us, or maybe not all of us, but at least some of us have had times in our own lives when we were cash poor, but we were happy. So, what is it? It's not that there's no connection between prosperity and happiness. So, what are the connections? What would ideal richness look like? It's not necessarily just having bundles and bundles of cash. What would be the ideal career? Instead of thinking of a career title, think of what you'd be experiencing in the career to have it be ideal in terms of the type of prosperity that you love. For example, when we change currencies, whenever if you've ever traveled overseas or to another country, you notice that when you change from one currency to another, there's always some kind of a fee and some kind of exchange rates when you do the exchange the currency, and therefore, if you were to change your money to some other kind of denomination and then change it immediately back, you would experience a loss. So similarly, if there are certain prosperity types that you that feel most enriching to you, and you instead of getting those directly, if you're getting those indirectly, then there's a little bit of a loss. So it's worth thinking about how to get those types. What are those types of prosperity that you personally like? This is a personal preference. There's no right or wrong answers. And then thinking about what are the ways of getting those. So some of you may be familiar with these 6 types of prosperity because these are the 6 types of prosperity of which the Lord, the Supreme Person, is in full. He has all of these in full. So we put Sanskrit words because although there are translations, they don't exactly come across. So we just put the Sanskrit word directly, and then there's some English to give the idea. So Aishvarya is organizational leadership, money, and luxury. And this is the one that people mostly think of as cash. So, but it can encompass other aspects of Aishvarya. Then Gyan is knowledge and wisdom. Virya is strength, power, and health. Uh, Shri is splendid beauty. It's a kind of radiant beauty, and it includes gracefulness and charismatic leadership. So if you've been around a while, then you may have heard various Vaishnavas and even the Supreme Person that they're addressed with the epithet Shri, because this is a kind of prosperity that comes from inner connection also, but it also exists as within this world. Then there is Yash, which is meritorious fame and community, reputation. These are aspects of Yash. And finally, there is Vairagya, which is equanimity and freedom. So it's worth taking a moment to think. So if you could pick one or two of these that would be continually coming to you, which would you pick? Which of these do you like best? So then, besides the prosperity types, there is this key verse in the Bhagavad Gita: Chaturvarnyang maya srishtam guna karma vibhagashah tasya kartaram apimang vidya kartaram avyayam. Chapter 4, verse 13. According to the three, so this is Sri Krishna speaking, the Supreme Person. According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non doer, being unchangeable. So when we were preparing this book was 6 years in the making. We started it in 2017 in New Vrindavan. We began to consider, why did Sri Krishna make four fields, as he just said, four fields of work? And why these four in particular? Why not six? Why not two? What is it about these four fields, and why is it so important to divide the careers into four fields? The main reason, well, actually, before I tell you, does anyone have any idea? I guess you're a little
Social order,
social order, yes.
law and everyone to live peacefully without any conflict.
Yes, that's good. Thank you, Patita Pavan Balaram Prabhu. Social order for people to live peacefully without conflict. Um, and so, yes, that is the ultimate goal. And so I'll just say, how is it that this division into four fields helps that goal? The main reason is that the dharma of each field is somewhat different. So what is right and true and useful in one field is actually harmful in another. These are the values behind each field. And these particular distinctions are in the ancient spiritual literature because they're a guide to disposition and satisfaction that may not be as applicable in other models. So then we're going to talk about each of these four fields in turn, the values within each field, and I'll briefly touch on uh, after that the distinctions between pairs of fields. So first, let's talk about the field of artistry. So the order that we're talking about these is from in order of decreasing abstraction and decreasing numbers of people who are interested in that field. So the most popular field, common, you could even say normal field, is the field of artistry. So the field of artistry provides beauty and function in society. Work in artistry has clearly defined and objective standards of excellence, and it often has equally clearly defined processes for achieving excellence. For example, a dance form such as ballet, and it looks like my cursor doesn't do anything here. A dance form such as ballet or a craft such as furniture making has firm boundaries of what works, and it also has well established means of training. So, this is an advantage of uh, being able to work in that field, is that one has clear guidelines of how to progress because everything is well defined. And so some of us love the fine arts or service careers or jobs where we get to hone a craft. And we might love being able to literally move in the world in a way that people find useful or inspiring. So that's physically move. Um, so you can think about, would you like to play with these areas? Or would you like to work with these areas most of the day, sometimes just as a hobby, or even all day, every day? And there's also the widest variety of careers is in this field of artistry, which makes sense since it's the widest number of people belong to it. Oh, I guess we didn't put it in that order. Anyway, okay. All right, so the next field we have is the field of ideas. So the field of ideas provides wisdom, guidance, truth, and education to society. And these jobs can be in research and study, and they can include teaching anything at any level. Counseling and therapeutic jobs are also in this category, And so are those who lead others in religious instruction, training, and who also do rituals and worship. So some of us love to toy with ideas and take them apart and put them together as if they were like interlocking colored blocks. We might love teaching and discovering new ways of understanding that we teach others. So you can think about how much do you like to play with ideas and words, logic, math. Would this be something that you would like for a career to do all day or just some of the time? So this is the most abstract of the fields, and it has the fewest number of people. Um, that's the field of ideas. Now, work in the field of ideas is not necessarily limited to being expressed in words. Sometimes ideas are expressed through song, gesture, painting, and so forth. So then the question arises, so how do we differentiate between art that is in the field of artistry and art that is made in the field of ideas? So remember that the key distinctions between the fields are the values. So the distinction for this case is that in the field of ideas, the truth of what is being expressed is paramount, whereas in the field of artistry, the aesthetics are paramount. So if you hear of a starving artist, they could be starving because they just haven't been trained in how to make a living through art. But if they're starving for years and years, it could be because they care more about the truth than about satisfying their patrons and making art that is attractive to people, and therefore they don't have as many customers. That's one possible reason that they're actually in the field of ideas rather than the field of art, the field of artistry. The next field is the field of resources, expanding wealth and profit. So these people are absorbed with how to use resources effectively and efficiently, and with the distribution of products. So there's more abstraction in this field than in artistry. It's the next most abstract. And the concepts of an ideal worker in this field vary considerably from one culture to another, and even within a culture. The measure of a successful career in this field has some variance. Excuse me. So the increase in abstraction makes it a little harder to determine how to progress in the field and what is a high standard. One has to have a little bit more independence. So some of us love to start and run businesses and to play with money. Sometimes they're like little children who start selling pencils or lemonade. Or we might enjoy working with natural resources in farming. If we're in this field, we have an insatiable thirst to expand, to improve and increase profit, yield, and efficiency. So think about how much you like to play in this field. Would you like to do this all day or just sometimes? So I should say that all of us have to do all of these things at some point in our life just to run our household. But the question is, do you like this so much that you would want this to be your main, what is occupying eight hours of your day or even more every day? That's the key thing. And finally, the field of government. So this is the next most abstract after resources, fewer people. It's just slightly less abstract than ideas and less populous. So as human beings are social animals, anything more than a very small group of humans requires some system of defense and oversight of the group as a whole. Now, something that often confuses people is whether leaders of any kind of enterprise, such as a corporation, are in the field of government. So a key distinction is that government is responsible for the interests of everyone in a domain, whereas an enterprise focuses on the interests of a small subset of people, like the people who are particularly interested in that industry or who belong to that enterprise. And it can even solve problems by excluding people from that domain of interest, but by kicking people out or dismissing them, deciding that they're not the customer or they're not going to be the employee or whatever. Whereas government cannot narrow things that way. Government must take into account the needs of everyone. So I think this is, oh yes, we have one more slide, a couple more slides about government. One more slide about government. So government, it might seem like the field only involves careers that are in official governments. However, people can work in this field if they are part of organizations that do work similar to that of the government. So on a large scale, such work might involve careers in NATO, the United Nations, or Interpol. There's something called Partners in Health, which goes and uh, builds health infrastructure in countries that don't have it, but it's a non-governmental organization. On a very small scale, work as a security officer for a business or as a landlord of an apartment building might be part of this field. So that's the field of government. Now, in the universal body, the field of government is compared to the arms. So this is drawing on a metaphor where the fields are work together to make up society, just as the different parts of the body work together to create and sustain the health of the body. So as government includes military and other forms of protection, arms is often used as a synonym for weapons, but arms are not only for the protection of the body, they are also for providing what the body requires. They collect some of the wealth received by those in the field of artistry and generated by those in the field of resources as taxes and fees, and then they redistribute that. So before I go on, does anyone have any questions about the four fields as I've described them so far? Okay. So now let's talk generally about why it's important to know what field you're in and to work according to the field that actually suits you. So Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 35 says, don't jump onto someone else's path, even if it seems so much easier and better than yours. It is better to endure the difficulties of your own path. Sorry, I should silence that. Because to walk a path meant for another is very dangerous. So we're going to explore the harms of being, let me silence this. We're going to explore the harms of being in the wrong field. So that verse was Shreyan Swadharmo Viguna Paradharmat Svanushtita Swadharme Nidhanang Shreya Paradharmo Bhayavaha. And this last word, bhayavaha, will occur in a future slide. So working well in the wrong field may require consciously adopting a different persona, like an actor. And even talented actors would find it an unbearable strain to stay in character constantly. In a similar way, even an expert at playing the role required for another field will at the very least feel strained and will eventually revert to his or her own true nature in whole or in part. So when we actually act according to the nature that we have, then it is easy to make our mind our friend because we're not constantly fighting with our mind. But when we're constantly acting in a role which is not suited to our nature, then we have made our mind our enemy, and then we will constantly be fighting with our enemy. So this is that last word, bhayavaha, of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 35, a vehicle of fear. So doing unsuitable work is dangerous. So because rather than being absorbed in our work because it generates inner happiness, because it is suitable to us, we tend to worry about it, fear it, complain about it, and we attempt to adjust the externals, hoping that by adjusting those externals, that will substitute for what is intrinsically out of sync. And as many of you know, that in the Bhagavad Gita, it's Shri Krishna says to do the work without being attached to the fruits. But if the work itself is so uncongenial, it's very difficult not to be attached to the fruits because the fruit is what one is working for. Oops. So we can think about situations where we've been happy with the work itself, and we can think about other situations where we might have been upset about the externals. Um, so when we're doing our dharma versus others' dharma, when we do others' dharma, we feel depletion. It's very, very draining. We feel frustration versus when we do our own dharma, we feel energized by the work. We might feel tired, but it might be a happy tired, not like a very draining tired. Um, and and I also mentioned that the mind being the enemy versus the friend, and we can be attached to the results versus being detached from the results, and then we easily, naturally offer them to Krishna. So that is what I had to say about working according to our nature. Any questions so far? Maybe we'll take questions at the end then. All right, so then the next principle, so this is in module 2, which is finding satisfaction and purpose in our work. So once we have settled ourselves into a career that is according to our nature, then the question becomes, what is the art of work? So Shri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Karma Sukoshalam. This yoga is the great art of work. So what are the principles of that great art? So we'll talk briefly about two of the principles. Excuse me, what time should I finish?
3:45.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, then we'll have plenty of time, I think. All right. So, principle 3 is extending our prosperity to others. So, this is a reminder. These are the different kinds of prosperity. This is on the left, and now we have on the right sample ways to give that type of prosperity and charity. So, remember what I said about the currency exchange. We often think that, okay, we'll just give money to charity. That's what charity is. However, if we are attached to a particular type of prosperity, then it actually purifies us, and it is actually very rewarding if we give that same type of prosperity that we ourselves like in charity. And so here are some ways. So Aishwarya, as we mentioned, was organizational leadership, money, and luxury. So some examples are that we could organize the community in festivals, or we could sit in the local civilian review board overseeing the police. That's the organizational leadership part. And then, of course, the money part is kind of obvious that we give actual cash. But yes, that's the easiest one that we can give in charity because people are used to thinking of it that way. Then gyan, knowledge and wisdom. We could tutor local children as a volunteer, or we could research what can have a positive impact on our community and bring it to these ideas around organizing our community. Then there's virya, strength, power, health. That includes physical health. So we might volunteer for disaster preparedness and relief. I was just reading about someone who had spent many years as a volunteer firefighter. Or we could act as a lifeguard at the public pool. So these are different ways that we can volunteer our health in charity. And Shri, which, as we mentioned, was splendid beauty, gracefulness, charismatic leadership. So we could paint murals celebrating our neighborhood. We could sing in a choir or kirtan. And we can also lend our charisma to causes. You often see this, that people who are celebrated for their Shri, they often become spokespeople for various charities and raise money for different causes. Another reason, another way to do that is when we have yasha. So yasha is meritorious fame and community. So it's fame for doing good in society. So it's not, ooh, I actually do have a pointer. How did that? Anyway, all right. So we can So yasha does not mean just celebrity. So if someone is famous just for being famous, like, so people say the Kardashian sisters are famous just for being famous. I don't know them, but maybe that's the case. You know, they're just like the subject of gossip or something. That's not yasha. Yasha is being famous for doing good in society and in the community and doing righteous deeds. So a person who has yasha can headline fundraisers for community and causes, or they could also help other talented people gain recognition and advancement opportunities. They can use their yasha as a volunteer. And of course, they can also do volunteer work organizing the community, as we mentioned before. And then finally, vairagya. So vairagya is equanimity, freedom, renunciation. So this is also somewhat easy to understand how we can give in charity. We can help in a charity drive, encouraging people to donate unused clothing, non perishable food, furniture, and so forth. But also, we can share our techniques for simple living if we have vairagya. And we could teach classes in forgiveness and other virtues that arise from detachment and neutrality. So these are some ways that we can give the type of prosperity that that we ourselves like in charity. The Sanskrit word for a kind of wealth is bhaga, which comes from the root word bhaj, meaning, or actually it's bhanj, which means to divide or share. So we can start by sharing our wealth with our own family. In fact, according to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, it's necessary to share one's wealth at least with one person. But beyond this, we can give some of our earned wealth in charity to those who are less fortunate than ourselves in some way. Now, so by the way, that means charity is the translation of the Sanskrit word dan. That's charity. And so one does not give in charity when one is giving to a temple or a spiritual, to the deities or something like that. That is an offering. So in the English word charity, like if you're giving, if you're getting a deduction for charitable donation, then you can get a tax deduction for giving to a church or a temple. So it may make you think that that is giving charity, but this is not charity according to the Sanskrit meaning of dan. You can't actually give dan to the Lord because the Lord is full in all opulences. So the Lord does not need anything from us. You can make an offering to the Lord. And there's a pastime I won't go into in the Chaitanya Charitamrita which emphasizes this. So we need to find people who are somehow less fortunate than us and who have less of this kind of prosperity and find recipients. So some reasons why one might want to try to avoid giving in charity is that one might be afraid that one doesn't have enough oneself. But actually, this fear, so people have done research, and of course it's also found in our ancient scriptures, that this fear is itself, it's actually just something that occurs in our mind independently of how much money or how much prosperity we actually have. It is, and it's actually helpful to overcome that fear is by acting as if we're not afraid. Is by actually making the act of giving in charity that actually helps us to overcome that anxiety. And without doing that act, one can have many, millions or even billions of dollars and still have this anxiety. We give lengthy examples in our book of people like that. So it is the charity itself that frees us from this fear and this clinging attachment. Now, we might also fear that the recipient is unworthy, that the recipient is somehow going to cheat us. So there's a few different ways to deal with that. So this is distrust, that we don't trust the recipient. So if some ways are that we can find some recipients of some kind of charity that are kind of not in a position to cheat us, like, for instance, if they're small children or they're animals or they're developmentally disabled people or demented people, people who are not in a position to cheat you, and you somehow directly help them, then you have the benefit of giving in charity without that danger. Or we could get very involved in the organization, in the running of of a charitable organization. So we actually know exactly where all the funds are going or how everything is being used that we're donating. That's another way. And the third way is that we can give in a wide variety of places, and we can just be detached and realize, okay, maybe some percentage of people will be cheaters, but if we're giving in a diverse a manner, then at least some of the people will be benefited. But Shri Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 18 that dan, yajna, and tapa, charity, sacred celebrations, and self discipline are never to be given up, even by the great souls. So it is always necessary to give in charity. So that was principle 3. Any questions about that? All right, then principle 4. This is again in the same module, finding satisfaction and purpose in our work, is doing ethical and meaningful work of value. So this pyramid you might be familiar with, excuse me, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Or maybe a slight variant. It may not be exactly the way that he originally put it. Maslow was a psychiatrist, or actually a psychologist in the 20th century. So these needs, the physiological needs, are the ones that, which are, that's sort of obscured by the frame of the banner, but that bottom thing says physiological needs. So these are the things that everybody absolutely needs to just continue with life. Then there's safety needs. Then there's social needs. Um, then there's esteem needs. And finally, there's self actualization. So this is interesting that Maslow considered that only once the needs at the bottom of the pyramid were satisfied could one consider the next level of needs. And that is true to some extent. Like if one is in a very unsafe situation, then it is really hard to think about anyone else. But it is also true that one can continue to have some degree of these needs, these lower needs being unsatisfied, and still be driven by the higher needs according to this pyramid. So we want to do honest work of value, and that is helping others in some way to satisfy these needs. So honest work is fair to the worker, the consumer, the employer, and whoever else is involved, the supplier. It's fair to all the parties who are involved. And it directly provides for the needs of ourselves and others. Uh-oh. I guess that's very important. Yes. So, for instance, when we contribute to produce food, build houses, enforce society's laws, enhance relationships, increase wisdom, and ultimately nourish the spirit's needs for love, freedom, joy, vitality, and understanding. So each of these is a kind of need that all beings have. And so this honest work is actually satisfying these needs in some way. I don't remember if I have a slide about manufactured needs. No, I don't think so. Okay. So let me just say that in today's world, and it's actually been going on for 100 years at least, it's a very interesting history. In today's world, there are a lot of manufactured needs. They're not real needs. So with the Industrial Revolution that was really taking off from 1870, Then starting in the 1920s, people found increasing returns to scale. They found that with factories, they could make large amounts of things uh, more cheaply than if they made smaller amounts of things. So they needed things to be sold in large quantities. But then they needed a large market to take advantage of that. So then the advertising industry was sort of born. Um, I mean, there were some kinds of advertising obviously before that, but it started becoming much more sophisticated in telling people that you need things that honestly you don't actually need. So, for instance, an example we give in the book is of the diamond ring, the diamond engagement ring. So, this idea was propounded, I believe, starting in the 1930s. If I look it up in the book, it'll say exactly when. Um, it was by the De Beers Company, which was mining diamonds and wanted, they had, so in the past, people found resources like gold or silver and they found a silver mine. And then there was a problem that they would flood the market with that. And then the value of whatever that thing was, it would drop because of the increased supply. So for instance, when the Spaniards colonized America, they got a lot of gold, but then the value of gold dropped because there was so much gold. So the De Beers Company was very clever. They had started this mine, and they said, "Oh, well, if we start releasing all these diamonds, then the value of diamonds will drop, but we will artificially increase the value of diamonds." So they came up with this idea, and I think it was originally that the value of a diamond that a man gives to a woman for her engagement ring should be at least 1 month of his salary, and maybe then they increased it to 2 months of his salary. So this was completely fabricated. Like there was no reason for this, and it it then became a norm in at least in America, and I believe in some other countries. It became a norm that you must buy a diamond of this size to show how wealthy you are. Um, give this to for this woman to become your fiance. So that's an example of a manufactured need. So we can all think about whatever our work is ultimately producing, which it might be that we're very far removed from that because there's many layers, So that was sort of a simple example, but now this complex society has been built up with many layers. We want to think about what is our work actually producing, and do people actually need that, or is it something that we're sort of bamboozling them into thinking that they need? So that's part of considering whether our work is honest. Now, this verse is going to sound very similar to a verse that I just said earlier in this talk, which was chapter 3, verse 35. So the first two lines of this verse are identical. So this is one of only two verses in Bhagavad Gita where Shri Krishna has repeated the identical verse twice. So that tells you how important he thinks it is. So again, this is this verse. Shreyan swadharmo viguna paradharmat swanushthitat swabhava niyatang karma kurvannapnoti kilbisham. It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform it imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly. Doing duty set by one's nature, one incurs no offense. And so if you start thinking about honest work of value and you think about it very deeply, then you realize that it's actually quite a high bar to actually do honest work of value. It's actually quite difficult. So thankfully we have this verse that at least if we do work according to our nature, then Shri Krishna takes into account that we are doing what we're able, and then we incur no offense. But it does mean that it is very important that we do work according to our nature. Now, what if we do work that is not according to our nature? So there's 4 fields, And so if you do work that is not according to your nature, then your nature can be in one field and the work is in another field. So that's six pairs of combinations. And then it could be going either way. So that's 12. So we have a very long chapter in the book describing what is wrong with all of these 12 crossings. We call them crossing from one field into another, crossing from our natural field into a different field of work. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of those, but I'll just say briefly a few examples. Crossing government and resources. So government redistributes the people's own wealth, or it and resources creates new wealth, or it turns natural resources into usable wealth. So this difference means that resource people think that those in government are foolishly generous, quote unquote generous, and government people think that those in resources are too profit-minded. And I will read from chapter 6. This chapter is the long chapter. I will just read a little bit from page 77. Just a second. I have a sticky here, but I have too many stickies. Ah, yes. All right. A prime example of how the mood of the field of resources is incompatible with work in the field of government is in the running of prisons. Ideally, persons in the field of government act for the benefit of all of society and keep the long-term interests of all people at heart, with fairness and justice as highly prized values. Their roles include protecting the people in general from crime, for example, by imprisoning criminals. The criminals are also among the people under their care. So running prisons includes preventing crimes within the prisons, i.e., preventing prisoners from perpetrating further crimes while incarcerated, and protecting prisoners from being victimized by other prisoners. Running prisons also includes reforming the prisoners, both for their own upliftment and for preventing additional harm and violence to society at large at the time of their release. When persons whose nature is in the field of resources run prisons, on the other hand, they are not intrinsically motivated to focus on preventing crime within the prisons, since doing so does not affect resources one way or the other. Financially, they have no incentive to reform the prisoners, but quite the opposite. If the released prisoners go on to commit more crimes and are again sent to prison, there's greater recidivism, perhaps due to criminals being traumatized or hardened or trained in crime while they're in prison and or making new criminal contacts while they're in prison. This helps the quote unquote business of running prisons to be sustainable and regenerative, which are the values of the field of resources. So persons focused on resources may also be tempted by considerations of efficiency to use prisoners as cheap and involuntary labor for other enterprises, lining their own pockets in the process. In all these ways, such persons significantly undermine the role of prisons in promoting justice in society. So this is a major example of, in economics, they call these perverse incentives, that why private prisons are wrong and private running of prisons by business people is wrong. Then another example is crossing between government and artistry. So government people tend to want to expand. They want to expand the domain of people under their care and want to keep improving more and more the resources under their care that are being distributed to the people and so forth. Whereas those in artistry tend to be more satisfied. On the other hand, those, did I have ideas here? Oh, yes, that's the next one. Okay. So those in government and artistry also tend to be more external focused on what is actually happening in the world. And those in ideas are more absorbed in their internal state of awareness. I think I should have put this on the next slide. So this is crossing ideas and artistry. So those in ideas and artistry do have some commonality. They do tend to be satisfied, But those in artistry tend to be more external focused, and those in ideas are more absorbed in their internal state of awareness. And remember again that those in the fine arts might be either in artistry or ideas. And so we have also examples of what issues there are with these. Um, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go to too many more examples. I'll just go through one more example of crossing fields. That is resources and artistry. So both resources and artistry, they have some commonality in that they deal with the practical needs of society and not so much with the abstract concepts. But those in artistry tend to focus on craft, quality, and the satisfaction of a job well done. And those in resources tend to focus on profit, expansion, and quantity. And at times, these can be at odds with one another. So that concludes the slides that I have. And I had wanted to leave a lot of room for questions so that because this is an important topic. It's a lot to absorb, and it's also a lot to apply. So even just understanding the concepts is one thing, but actually applying it in specific cases is another. So so I'll end the main presentation here, and we can then take questions.
Should I turn the lights on, maybe?
Sure. So I can stop projecting, I guess, or.
Are you ready?
Or anyway, I'll keep this up in case someone has a question that refers to us. But yeah, no, you can keep the lights on, and then if someone has a question, we can, but I'm just not going to shut my computer and stuff.
1, 2.
So everybody woke up?
So, what is the one-to-one between resources, Vaishyas, and like government, Kshatriyas? Can you?
Yes. Okay. So we chose not to use the Sanskrit terms, but I think you all, or many of you, are familiar with the Sanskrit terms. But yes, those are the corresponding Sanskrit terms. The main reason that we chose not to use the Sanskrit terms in our book is that there are many misconceptions regarding those fields that are associated with those Sanskrit terms, and they actually have caused a lot of damage in society and can be very destructive. So we chose to just make new English phrases, but yes, those are the corresponding ones. There is an example of a music school that would ask whether you had. It was a very elite and famous music school. They would ask whether you had been trained in music before applying to their school, and if you had been, then they would charge you more because they would have to teach you. They would have to help you unlearn all the things that you had learned that were not according to the proper way. So, but yes, that's what those are.
You have a question, please?
You go outside of ISKCON to talk about this book?
So I have not yet. I have just talked about it in Columbus, and this is actually my personal second time talking about it. I've like this is my second time talking about it since the book was published, and then while the book was being written, I gave talks in various ISKCON places. But Urmila has been giving talks in various venues. I think the most sort of external one was in Lloyd's of London. She gave a talk that was pretty well received, and I think some university, so sort of university outreach program. She's been to a couple of those. She's been touring extensively since I think May or June. Traveling first in Europe and then right now she's in India, and she also went to the Middle East. So yeah, she's been getting a lot of good reception, but it has been mostly within ISKCON. I had been asking that it's good for people in yoga studios. They often inquire, how do we take yoga off the mat? And there's even some people who say that, oh, actually yoga it's like a kind of I don't know if you've heard the phrase from Marx that religion is the opiate of the masses. So people have actually made this complaint that yoga makes you just feel a little better about your workplace, and then you go and you're kind of, subdued. So then you don't complain about the things that are wrong. But as you see, as already from what we described just in this talk and in our book, we don't shy away from saying that there are things within society that need to be changed, like the principles, you know, and I actually didn't even go to part 3, which is mostly about society as a system, how it would be different if it was according to the principles of career dharma. However, most people are individuals and don't have control over, their workplace. So we spend the first 2 parts of the book. The greater part is mostly on what can one person do as an individual, how they can direct their own career in a way that is, and I think that both of those will be helpful to different people who are not necessarily within ISKCON. And our target audience originally was just young people ages 18 to 28 who are getting prepared for their careers or starting their careers, and who are open to Eastern philosophy but don't necessarily know anything about it. So it's written for a popular audience. It's not written just for a devotee audience. I'm sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, do you see a role for this book in high school? I don't know, I'm just asking this question without knowing. Any specific departments could do this? Or is it a library kind of setting that you could do this?
We would love for this to be available in high school libraries and to career counselors. Career counselors are people who tend to counsel people in high school and college. Ormila found, she said so far that young people are not necessarily aware of how much they need this themselves, because they're sort of used to being on a path and being directed by elders, and they just think if they just go on that path, then things will be okay. And usually one is only after being in the workplace for 10 or 15 years, one realizes, oh no, that was not okay.
And then what?
Yeah. So besides our original audience, but we feel it would do the most good if it's at this earlier stage, but the people at the earlier stage may not realize that they need it. So besides that, there's also people who have been in the workplace for some time and realize that they need some kind of a transition, and they may not that they may not know what exactly is wrong, but they feel that some spirituality can help their career in some way. So, for instance, people who are on the edge of burnout for one reason or another, and also parents of like teenagers, parents of those high schoolers or college students who themselves have experienced the workplace, so they know, and people who guide them, guidance counselors, teachers, whoever guides the young people.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you for your question.
Students, how do you think that, what's the best way for them to determine, like, not what their passion is, but what, like you said, it's not really what we're talking about, but like what's a good fit for them?
Yes.
It's
So
just trial and error?
well, so we have 4 basic pairs of questions that we ask about each field, and we also have exercises in this book to determine. So one thing would be reading the book themselves thoroughly. However, it is hard to get young people these days to read a book, but if they do, so is that it's not clear what the 4 fields are until you've read and understood it thoroughly, and then to ask those questions of themselves. So the driving questions of the field of artistry are: is it beautiful, and is it supportive? Helping other people. Those are the driving questions. And the driving questions of the field of ideas are: is it wise, and is it true? The driving questions of the field of resources are: is it sustainable, and is it regenerative? Now, sustainable doesn't, in these days, it just means, is it green? But we spend some time saying it's not just, is it green? We also mean, is it like financially sustainable? That's probably the primary way that that people in the field of resources think. And if they then have a broader vision, then they will understand that that also includes being sustainable of the earth and of the suppliers and so forth. And regenerative means that being in tune with the cycles of nature and with the cycles of business and the cycles, the worldly cycles, being in tune of cycles, so that when there's a downturn, you act in such a way that you're ready for the upturn. And so good resources people are able to do that. And finally, in the field of government, the driving questions are, is it just and is it honorable? Is it fair? These are the driving questions. When we first started writing this book, I mentioned to Urmila that people will definitely want us to give them a quiz so that they'll just be able to take the quiz and find out. Like, you take a quiz and you see, what Harry Potter house you belong to. So it'll be like that. But, Urmila is a social scientist. Like, she actually did a lot of research in her PhD. And I mean, we're both some kind of scientists. I'm a game theorist. So we felt that we can't really provide an instrument without validating that instrument. Oh, sorry, I'm tapping the microphone. And we didn't have the data, so we didn't want to promulgate an instrument that we haven't actually validated. Urmila has also gotten a lot of experience on, in the several months of this tour, personally coaching people who have questions. But we would eventually want to be able to train people to help others also. It can't just be, one person. We would want to train people to help others to get to that point. But we also give a list of reasons why you might be pushed into some field that is not your natural field. And so if you just think about those reasons, maybe that will help you to think about, okay, so am I doing this because my parents want me to, or just because I think it's prestigious, or because all my friends are doing it, or because one of the reasons is that sometimes people think, oh, people of such and such race or ethnicity or nationality, or they're good at this kind of thing, they should all do this. I mean, none of those things is correct. So if we remove all these external forces, I mean, the external forces will be there, but if we are able to take a step back from all these external forces and just look within our heart, that may help us. But yeah, it is a knotty problem, so it's intricate. Yeah. So yeah, people do find challenges.
So the two-word summarization you mentioned is great. Is that in the book also?
Yes, I forget which chapter, but I think it's the one about the 4 temperaments. Let's see here. Chapter 4, I believe it's in there. 59. He's asking because he actually has the book.
We can check.
Yeah, it might be in there. But yes.
So the motive of this book, or the motivation, is to help the people like know what their career path is, and then also do a particular thing with knowing that that's the right thing to do and be maintain honor in the society. Right?
Yeah, so it was Urmila who invited me to join her in writing this book, when she initiated the project. And so she had been talking briefly about these principles. She's been a traveling speaker for many years, at least 10 or 15. I don't know exactly how long. And many people, and when people heard the small amount that she said in those days, they were really they often would ask her, oh, could you please write a book about this? This is so helpful. So many devotees, especially, she at least prior to this, she's mostly been speaking to people who are already bhakti yoga practitioners. They find a disconnect between bhakti and their career. And since we spend like the greater part of our day in career, that's a big disconnect. So the question was, how do we spiritualize our career? So that's one thing is what are the spiritual career principles for devotees? But then it's also for people in general in society, because yes, as you say, that it actually promotes order in society and harmony. And so this time from 2017 to 2023, this is 6 years, there's been a lot of turmoil in society. And I have kept seeing, because I've been in the process of writing this book, that how these causes root causes of not going according to these principles, they have led in many, it's like a big tree of corruption and conflict that emerges from these roots. And it's actually, and so that if you look at all the conflict and corruption and disagreement and um, tension, it looks very hopeless because there's many different things that are wrong. But if you see that actually at the root there's only a few things, there's these few principles, then it actually is a cause for hope and inspiration, because that means that by working according to these few principles, then we can actually help many of these problems that all seem to be very different from each other. It's said by Tolstoy in Anna Karenina that all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So all the problems that arise, they look like thousands of different problems, but then if the solution is few, then it becomes more doable. And so it's both helpful for people in general, and it's also that also helps devotees if more people in general do this, because most devotees are working with people in society. So then that helps devotees also to have a peaceful life and spiritual life. But yes, it's good for people in general. Now we want to make clear, I don't remember if I said this, that so so bhakti is independent of these career principles, and one can achieve the highest goals of bhakti without doing a career or doing any of these career principles. But it's just like a platform or something helpful. It makes it easier, but it's not necessary. Hare Krishna. So I think this was close to the time that you said. Should I wrap up now?
Yeah, we'll get ready to jump the rest of it.
I mean, unless
Does anyone have any other more questions for Rukmini? All right, well, let's thank Mataji for
Okay.
a wonderful presentation. Big enthusiastic.
Haribol.
Haribol.
Thank you. Haribol. Jai Guru Maharaj,
I
Jai
passed out
Prabhupada, Jai Gurudev.
the words for Governor Rusticum with the English translations. I would like to take some volunteers, because keep in mind that Kartik ends today, so this will be the last time that we'll be singing it together this year. So if someone wants to, a few people want to volunteer and read the English translation while I get the PA moved over, I really appreciate it.